Items in Paladins can be a daunting prospect. There isn't anything in the tutorial about them, and when you get into game, you have pretty limited flavor text just to guess off. Well, today I'm going to give as to the point rundown as possible of every item in the game, the effects, who it is good against, and when you might want to pick them up. Just to get them out of the way, the basics are you get credits in the game by getting eliminations, stopping kill streaks, standing on the point, healing doing damage, and also passively over time. Damage champions get more for doing damage, frontliners for standing on the point, supports for healing, and flankers for getting flank kills. You can only spend these credits whilst in the spawn room, either in the planning phase or if you die. Items have 3 levels, and often the first level has a small effect and then grows exponentially as you get the more expensive level 2s and 3s. Often it is best to focus on getting less items that are important higher than having all 4 slots filled. And yes, you can only buy 1 card for each of the 4 categories, and currently there is no way to undo a purchase, so be very careful when you're buying something. So let's get on with each category. First up is the aggressive items. Cauterize is a status debuff that gets stuck on a player when you hit them with your weapon attacks for 1.5 seconds. All healing that player receives will be reduced by 30, 60 or 90% at level 1, 2 and 3. Only the highest level of this item will apply, going over the lower applications. This item is a must pick for your team against any main healer lineup. These are currently Ying, Grover and Maldamba. These are the champions that constantly heal and could get very high heals in a game. Grok and Pip do a lot of healing, but focus less on healing as a support unless Pip picks up the Mega Potion legendary or Grok a totemic ward, which you can see in the tab menu in the game if you go to the far right and hover over that symbol. Also with Grok you can just destroy the ward, which stops the healing altogether. The card also reduces self-healing, like Book's Q, lifesteal granted from abilities, items or cards, and this means even without a healer, it can sometimes be worth picking up. This card and applying the debuff works best on champions that have AoE, automatic or beam weapons, as they can spread the debuff across a lot of enemies and also constantly apply it. This item is probably the most important in the game at the moment because of the amounts they reduce healing by, especially only letting 10% of healing through at the final level. And healing saves people who are trying to escape on low health and practically increases the HP of enemies by healing them up. Also, healing champions often have AoE heals which affect many allies, so reducing that can be as good as a direct damage buff. Wrecker is a damage amplification when doing damage to enemy shields. You can see the personal shields indicated in yellow rather than red in the health bars in the game, also the deployable shields like Barrick's Barricade, Fernando's Rectangle and Makoa's Bubble. Inara, the new champion, does not use shields, so the rule of thumb at the moment is projected beams are shields. So Inara's wall is countered by Bulldozer, which I'll talk about in a moment. Wrecker is another big pickup. Why? Because at each level it gives a damage increase of 75, 150 or 225% to shields. Because Wrecker increases the damage by percentage, it benefits high damage champions most because they have the higher base damage to be increased by a flat percentage. So benefits especially the damage class of champions. Currently Wrecker is a must pick against a Torvald on at least one of your damage champions to burst down their huge personal shields, but is generally useful in dealing with the other shields in the game as well, and those shields can get into the hundreds of thousands of damage blocked in the game, so that shows how important this item is. Bulldozer, another item, increases the damage done to deployables by 50, 100 and 150% at each level. The deployables currently in the game are Grok's Totem, Ying's Clones, Barrick's Turrets, Inara's Obelisk and Wall, and if the enemy team has 2 of these champions in the game, it could be an option to have at least one of your players in your team to focus on taking these out. The only thing with deployables is they die when you kill the enemy, they can often just be avoided, and they don't have a massive health pool to begin with, apart from Inara's Wall, which is why I think not everyone on the team would need it, and it is a bit of a situational pickup if they have 2 champions with deployables. Now I'm just going to quickly talk about picking with your team in mind with these aggressive cards. Especially Wrecker and Cauterize are great to have a mix on your team if the enemy have a frontliner and healing support. No casual game is perfect, half your team might not want to pick up an aggressive item, but it's worth considering that say in a theoretical game, if all your damage dealers and tanks have all taken Wrecker for a Torvald, then you'll want to take Cauterize to stop a Ying's healing. And if everyone just picks up Deft Hands, then you'll just have to look on your team, their healer or healers, or their tank/tanks. On your own, Cauterize is likely better because healing affects a whole team, and also you can debuff several enemies at once. Also worth considering is if you take Cauterize and there are 2 others on your team, then your debuff will be less useful and might just be overridden, which means it is worth thinking whether or not you can commit fully to an item. What I'm getting at here is that balance is important with these aggressive items and having a mix on your team to meet the enemy team's setup. Finally, in the aggressive items, Deft Hands in my opinion is currently the new player trap. Reloading faster sounds good on paper, but champions like Charlene, Maeve, Grover don't benefit at all because they do not reload. New players might guess it affects refire time or draw time, but it doesn't. Also, whilst Deft Hands does increase your overall theoretical DPS by reducing reloading times, basically you can do more damage with less downtime, currently the card is more expensive at 400, 800 or 1200 credits at each level, and the extra DPS you will receive will likely be significantly lower than the high DPS as a damage you can do to tank shields with Wrecker or lowering heals with Cauterize, so I wouldn't currently recommend it. The only champions that it largely benefit a lot from is a Buck because he has a shotgun that reloads so often. Also, Maldamba can increase the speed at which he throws his stun snake, so if you're trying to go for that stun lock. Also worth mentioning is you cannot exceed 60% reload speed in the game, so if you have reload cards like Maldamba's 20% reload speed, you would only need Deft Hands 2 to reach the max reload. Next we'll talk about the defense cards. First off, the developers have added a note to almost every ability in the game now as to whether it does direct or area damage, underneath the description of each ability, which is important with the next 2 items, and if you're curious you can quickly flick through all the champions and see. I'll also post in the comments along with other resources some community charts with the damage champions on them. So Haven reduces damage done by direct damage effects by 7, 14 and 21%. Direct damage is generally attacks that have no splash and damage one enemy at once. The exception is shotguns, which have spread but still count as direct damage. Most champions in the game currently have their left click, their main weapon and source of damage, as direct damage, which is often why Haven is a popular pick. However, Blast Shields reduces the damage done by area effects by 7, 14 and 21%. So generally, explosive splash weapons or abilities like Maldamba's Gourd, which does damage on the ground in an area, are area damage. For both these items, you need to look at the enemy team, how many direct or area based champions do they have, and importantly, are their damage and flank champions mostly one or another. In short, if you do go for these defensive items, you'll need to pick based on what is going to do the most damage to you. And always remember that likely the most damage is going to come from the left click when you're looking at the enemies and their abilities. Both of these items used to be an instant pick, but the percentages were nerfed, and 7% whilst first level will often mean the aggressive items and their large debuffs and damage increases will be more important early in the game as a first pick. Unless, say, the enemy team is missing a frontliner or support, or your team has gotten most of the aggressive picks covered. Resilience reduces the duration of crowd control effects and effect of slow by 30, 60 or 90%. Basically any effect in the game that changes your state as a player, like a stun, a slow, knockback, being silenced, or even turned into a chicken, will be reduced by this card. It's especially good against Pip, as his ultimate turns everyone into a squishy 1500 HP chicken, which means enemies want to burst you down as quickly as possible, and coming out quicker reduces the ability to do that. On the stuns, Bomb King, who has Grumpy Bomb, Maldamba with his snakes, and Charlene with his Impaler Arrow are all reduced. Torvald's Silence, Grover Cripple, and Root with Legendary, Pip, Grok, Buck, Kinessa and Eevee have slows. Also, it is a big counter to Torvald's ultimate and Bomb King's Poppy Bomb, which can knock you off the edge of maps. This item is also only 200, 400 and 600 credits at each level, which, with aggressive items having so much impact at the moment, means against several or even one of these champions above, it can be an option over Haven and Blast Shields. Often not being able to move or being slowed could mean you're being hit by attacks you could dodge normally. Next is Illuminate. This item increases the distance which you can see the silhouette of enemies, like that outline, that are invisible close to you. The only problem is, currently in the game there are only 2 champions which do this, Charlene and Skye. It is a very situational pick if the Skye is giving your team lots of trouble, and they have buffed the invisibility range, but still, reacting and informed guessing often work as well as this card does. Onto the utility cards. First off, we have Morale Boost. This card increases the rate you charge your ultimate by 15, 30 or 45% at each level. Basically, you'll have your ultimate much quicker with this card. This card is especially good on the high impact ultimate champions, so Drogoz, Pip, Androxus, Makoa, Ruckus, but generally all champions will benefit from having their ultimates back more often. Maybe not Grog, but the only thing is you aren't necessarily spamming your ultimates in game, and the item is more valuable earlier on in the game when you haven't used your ultimate, or just after you have used your ultimate. So considering if you have actually had the right chances in the game to ultimate, are worth thinking about when picking up this item. Next is Kronos, and this card reduces all of your abilities cooldowns by 10, 20 or 30% at each level. This card is generally great for champions that have abilities with a long cooldown, and those that rely on using active abilities all of the time. Grok's Totem, Grover's Heal, Ying's Illusion, and Teleport, Maeve's Q, Barrack's Turrets and Deployables, etc. The bigger the cooldown, the bigger the reduction that the percentage is going to give. The only problem with Kronos is that it costs 400, 800 and 1200 at each level. However, unlike Deft Hands, even small reductions in abilities can mean a lot in games, and with some big cooldowns, even 1 or 2 seconds can mean quite a lot. Often people will get this early on if all aggressive items are covered, or if the enemy team doesn't really have a healer or tank. Then we have Master Riding. This increases mount speed by 15, 30 or 40% at each level. This card is good on frontliners, especially Barrack, who will want to go to the point in siege mode and set up their turrets. But generally, a frontliner getting the initial point hold, even if they go to harass or retreat, can mean early points and perhaps victory. Also, going in as a team and flanking and going behind an enemy before they can even react or get close to the point can be a bonus. It's also good when you're dying a lot, and if you don't have a utility card yet, as the more you die, the more you'll use this, and basically the quicker you'll be able to get back into the fight. It is also good on longer maps like Ice Mines, which has a very long ride to the point and enemy spawn. Finally, Nimble increases move speed base by 10, 20 or 30% at each level. Nimble does have the quirky mechanic that the strongest stat counts. So, if you have any cards in your build that give movement speed, like Charlene who can have 20% base speed increase, that will make level 1 and 2 of Nimble useless. Abilities that make you faster like Maeve's Prowl will also just override the Nimble bonus. The only champion that really benefits at the moment from this is Tyra, maybe Torvald, and now Inara, who don't have any escape or movement abilities built in. But still, morale boost, Kronos, and Master Riding will often be more valuable in games, which might make you think twice about the card. Finally, healing cards, and currently in the meta these cards are often weaker than the aggressive cards and defensive cards because Cauterize is so powerful and affects most of these, but also there are just other better options, but are useful if you have a less constant healer like a Pip or Grok, or maybe even none at all. Life Rip gives you a lifesteal of 10, 20 or 30% at each level. This percentage is based on damage done to an enemy in each shot. This is better on high damage champions, so damage and flankers really. It can give you the edge dueling with an enemy, as you'll be getting a small amount of health back from the enemy as you're fighting them. Next, Kill to Heal gives you 300, 600 and 900 health back whenever you get an elimination. This means even assist will heal you. Generally you get about 20 to 30 eliminations in a game. The only downside of this is it heals you after the fight is over, not during. So I'd say flankers that rely on burst and occasionally get caught out by another foe benefit from this most, as you'll be wanting to heal after the first kill to get onto the next target straight away. Rejuvenate buffs healing by allies by 10, 20 or 30%. It is a lower cost at 200, 400, 800 credits at each level, and now this card is quite situational. If your team ended up picking more than one healer or a very strong healer, it obviously makes it more worthwhile. Also, if the enemy have a lot of stuns and crowd control abilities, you can get both Resilience and this card at the start of the game, as you get 400 credits to begin with. It does slightly combat the effects of Cauterize, but still at its final level, it will only be blocking the first level of Cauterize. So for most purposes, currently it just isn't a great pickup. Veteran makes healing out of combat increase by 4, 8 or 12% of your max health out of combat. Now this is the only card that isn't demolished by Cauterize, as it requires you to be healing anyway. But it also has a low price of 200, 400 and 800 credits. It could be useful if you do not have any credits left over and you don't think any of the cards will be useful in this particular game, though healing out of combat is often a last resort for a lot of champions as it takes you out of the action. Anyway, those are all of the items covered today, and again, importantly, you need to take items to counter your enemy, but also to balance out what debuffs you have chosen on your own team. Also some little tips, if you're in the spawn room, the game starts, you're only 2 credits off from another item, you might want to consider whether getting Cauterized 2, which gets the 60% of the reduction, or being a bit late to the point is going to be more important. Also, if you have 500 credits, is the defense item, getting another 7% on Haven, more important, or is getting that 30% healing more important? And reacting to what's happening in the game, is the healer dying all of the time, or are they getting those mega heals out and the Cauterize is really what you need to wait for? I think that's something that you have to learn in game and sort of gauge every game, but just some little tips there. I hope this guide has helped, and it is a bit more in depth than a simple gloss over a basic guide. And does anyone have any more tips or thoughts? And does anyone have anyone they might share this with who is newer to the game? Be sure to let me know in the comments section below. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and I'll see you all in the next one. Joshino.